and then share file, and then it should be loaded, yeah.
If you go back to the people, down below, to next to where you went to share, then you'll be able to see where it was what you want to.
All right, so this afternoon we're going to start talking a little bit about play in preschoolers. As you all have probably been learning all about motor development and understanding kind of how these skills develop, play is a huge factor for young children and how they develop their motor skills. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the factors that encourage play, some of the factors that kind of take away from them playing, and some of the ways that play develops for children. And we'll kind of give you a full spectrum of that. So what does play do to develop motor skills? Well, first and foremost, you're looking at developing all of the major areas of human development through play. So you're stimulating their brains, you're developing all of their skills around thinking and problem solving.
You could take the mask off if you want to.
Oh, great, perfect. Developing all of their skills around social and emotional development. So you think about when you played on a playground ever in your life or played with friends, what you'll find is you're developing that kind of give and take that comes, and how you kind of navigate your own emotions, how you navigate the emotions of others. And then you're also developing creativity. I don't know about you, but when I played when I was younger, a lot of my play was around imagining things. You know, I think about the movie Toy Story and how you see in that movie the imagination of play with simple characters that become a, very energetic and exciting storyline for the young man in that story. And so that's exactly how creativity and language and other processing happens with play. And so sensory processing is another thing, because now they're getting opportunities to develop that tactile stimulation. What happens when I touch this, squeeze hard, push hard, kick hard? What does it feel like to move my body in space and see that motion and action, hearing the sounds of play, and what does that mean? How do I get distracted by the things that are happening around me or get in tune to the things around me? So all of those factors come into play. And then of course, probably the most important piece of that is that fine and gross motor development, where you are learning to develop the dexterity that you need with your fingers and your feet, to the large muscle movements of your hands and your arms and your trunk and your legs and all the facets of what it takes to grow. So what you also learn through play and movement is the ability to kind of reason out and think, how am I going to get to an end result? So say, for example, you get on a swing, right? If you've never swung before, you've got to figure out how I'm going to move my body. You can see our little friend in the picture there has figured out I can move my body by laying over the swing and making it happen. Some of us learn to sit down, but if you've ever sat on a swing and didn't really understand how to make it work, you realize really quickly you've got to move parts of your body to get the swing in motion, right? So you're having to make choices around that. You're having to trust your body to move. Be able to maybe visualize what potential movements am I going to need to take in order to go forward and backwards. And maybe I want to spin in a circle, or maybe I want to fly like Superman or Superwoman. What will that look like? So you learn to adapt, and you learn to pay attention to who it is that you are, and what kind of control and power can you exert through your body into that play experience, right? So you think about, if you just close your eyes for a minute and imagine what it was like to play when you were a kid. Whether it was on equipment or just on your own. When you went out there and you got ready to move your body, what did it take, What helped you get to some of those levels of mastery with your body that maybe you didn't have before? Or, taking those risks to try something out. Many of you probably played in some school playground at some point, so maybe you had to practice a little bit of responsibility. Maybe you even had to practice a little bit of compassion and sharing space with others, or collaborating. I remember working with a bunch of preschoolers, some of the biggest things were teaching each other how to push each other on the swings. Or if you go down this slide first and I'll go down right behind you, we'll kind of link up and be connected, and so our bodies would move in tandem. Or maybe we hook our legs around each other and we go down together. So all of these facets of learning and developing of their human beingness come from engaging in that movement and play. And so when you think about all that it takes to get to that point where not only are you moving your muscle systems and developing your control of those muscle systems, you are adding on a whole host of other aspects to that play experience as well. So how do you plan for play? How do you make play happen for children? And, definitely as we think about the impact of this pandemic on how kids are playing right now, whether they're not getting out and about as much, whether they're being stuck behind screens, or limited in their ability to have space to move their body, possibly limited because they don't have access to equipment, maybe at their school, or possibly through, their community systems and services. What are we missing? So how do we create a space where environments for play are going to happen? So first and foremost, you need lots of space. If you probably think back to some of your greatest play experiences, and some of mine were just where there was open space. I didn't need a lot of fancy stuff, but I needed a space to be able to run around, to imagine, to collaborate with others if that was the opportunity that was in front of me, but I needed that space. And so that's an important piece. And that space needs to be safe, of course. We want to take a look at, are there tripping hazards? Are there things that are going to make it difficult for us to play? Especially in New Mexico, where we experience a lot of weeds and, stickers and things that kind of make running around and being silly on the ground harder, because you have to be a little bit more aware of your environment. What are the materials that make play happen? When you look at some of the research around how kids play, it doesn't take a lot of stuff for them to be able to play, but what they do need is things that they can manipulate, things that they can adjust, things that can kind of challenge their muscles and their motor systems, can encourage them to take risks, can encourage them to develop some of that confidence around taking risks. And so, platforms, spaces, something to jump off of, possibly even a ball or some kind of hoop or basket that they can throw it into, some way to connect with something that they can develop certain skill sets with. So it needs something there, but it doesn't have to be fancy. Sometimes the simplest stuff, if you're given the right support and you're given the right environment, can allow a child to really get out there and do some crazy stuff and have fun doing it, right? And then you also want to pay attention to health and safety. If you are going to have materials and equipment that may have heights, that may have difficulty levels, then you want it to be appropriate for the age group that might be playing on it. We certainly don't want toddlers who are barely learning to walk and manage to control their own bodies to be, having a 4-foot or higher, space for them to possibly step off of, right? So we want to make sure that we're thinking about the space that they're in and the way that we're going to protect them. Making sure you have fall surfaces underneath spaces, things like that that are going to help them be able to jump safely from a height and still land and be okay and protect their body and their muscles. You want to have structure. You want to be able to go out there and kind of say, okay, let's think about how we could move our body in this space with a certain focus on our throwing or our jumping or our running. Or our vestibular, which is moving our bodies back and forth. What are going to be kind of the ways that we're going to interact with children around play? Because we know that kids can get out there and play, but I will tell you, it's a lot harder in these days when kids don't get as much time outdoors to get inventive, or if they don't get a long enough period of time to get creative on their own, that they're going to be struggling to kind of come up with things to do for themselves, right? So that's where we as adults get in there and can facilitate that and have some plans and goals, make sure that what we have intended for their muscle development is an opportunity that we talk to them about. And then you want to give them multi-sensory options. Not all kids like to throw. Not all kids like to run and jump. Not all kids like to touch things that are rough and scratchy. So what are the opportunities for them to have ways that they can approach play with different sensations and different sensory stimuli? because we know we need them to develop those skills, but we've got to give them an opportunity with how to do it through the equipment, through the plans, through the instructions, through all the different ways that we might interact with them. And then we want them to have peers to work around and to play with. Because oftentimes on your own, you're going to come up with some things, but you're not going to be challenged, right? You might be able to get out there and, play one-on-one with a niece or nephew or a sibling or someone that you enjoy, hanging out with that's younger. But oftentimes when your level far exceeds their level, that competition and that engagement in play is going to be different. And so you want to think about carefully what it is that it takes to kind of get them engaged. And a lot of times peers are the way to do that. And then transitions. Oftentimes once children are engaged fully in play, it's very difficult for them to want to step away from that. If you ever thought about a time when someone told you that you could no longer play or do something that you really enjoyed, how kind of frustrating it is. And as adults we learn to kind of moderate and cope with those transitions. But young children typically don't always have that skill set yet. Their frontal lobe development is still very immature, and so their ability to kind of slow things down, understand that they've got to make that shift, takes a lot of time for them. And so giving them an opportunity to understand a timeline of when that play is going to have to stop or when we're going to have to kind of taper off the movements of our body is an important piece of this as well too. And also preparing them for that. Some children have difficulty entering play, and so some children may need that preemptive understanding of what we're going to be doing and how we're going to be doing it as well. And then the last one is time. How are you going to make the space and the time, the length of time that children really need in order to get engaged in play? When lab students used to come out to the playground, they had about 20 minutes or so with the children. And oftentimes for some children who got warmed up into that play session, that 20-minute window now narrowed down to maybe 5 or 10 minutes that they actually got to actively play. And so for them, that was barely enough time to kind of get started and get moving. And so really thinking about how much time you provide and giving them a length of time that is going to encourage that creativity, encourage that opportunity to develop skill sets. You don't want them training like athletes, hard and fast for a short period of time. You want them to be able to get engaged and try out different things and take risks and enjoy the process of learning and growing in your confidence and your motor skills. And so that's a key piece to making sure you have enough time for play. All right. So what are some of the reasons why kids don't get out and play? Well, many of us probably are certainly aware of the idea that sedentary activities, technology, and TV really limit play. Screens are all around children these days, whether it's their parents' cell phones, whether it's a cell phone of their own, iPads, different tablets and things like that. There are even screens on gas station pumps nowadays. So when you look around a child's world, they are inundated with things that encourage them to stop, pay attention to this, and stop moving their body, right? It's not like that most screens have a treadmill attached or a playground attached to them. Most of them encourage that sit down and pay attention kind of behavior. And so oftentimes children aren't getting out and getting active with their bodies. And because that becomes a habit, or because they see others around them using that as a habit, they learn to emulate and do that same behavior. And so that's one of the barriers that we see is hugely impactful on children's motor movement and development because they're not moving their body, they're not learning to take those risks. Even if they are wiggly during a TV show, obviously they're not using the full spectrum of movement potential that they could. Inappropriate modeling. So many of our parents and adults in children's lives are not out there moving their bodies as well. We think about obesity as an epidemic in our country, and what do the children that live with parents who are not getting active, who are not engaged in behaviors that are teaching them how to move their body effectively doing? How are they coping with that? Many of them, resort to the same behaviors that they see modeled for them. Oftentimes also children don't have environments, in some places around our country, kids don't even have yards. It takes a long walk to get to a park, and that's if you have an adult that's willing to go with you and get you there. Some of them don't even have equipment or opportunity to get out and move their bodies effectively. And so what's limiting them in that respect, and what is that teaching them about how you move your body or how you don't move your body? And then poor nutrition also factors into where they don't even have the energy to get out and get movement. If all they're eating are sugary foods or foods that do not sustain a long-term play or muscle development, then even if they got the opportunity to get out and play, even if they were able to move in a space, they may not have what it takes to actually do that action. They may not be developing the nutrients and things that their body needs in order to make those muscles function at their best and to feel comfortable and confident in their own bodies. And then oftentimes what we are seeing now going forward is that there's a lot of structured play. I suspect many of you were probably in some kind of team sport at some point in your childhood, or some kind of structured sport or activity, whether it was dance or a sport, somewhere where you had very specific parameters around how you functioned and how you behaved. You know, your motor skills were honed to that specific expectation, you know, whether it was to learn how to kick the soccer ball or to learn how to hit the baseball and run the bases. You know, what did it take to get to that point was a very structured kind of engagement with that play. And so oftentimes they didn't have that opportunity to get creative. You didn't have that opportunity to really try out what your body could do. Because if you were like some of the kids I've seen in organized or structured sports and activities, is that those kind of behaviors are frowned upon. When you goof off at those types of activities, you're typically not engaging in some of the play that your body needs in order to develop, right? So think about that as you think about how structured time, even though it can be good, can be limiting. So some of the things to think about with 3 to 5-year-olds, and this is our kind of our preschool group, and you can kind of see some of the kids on the playground back when I was at the CDC with Dr. Wall. This picture is a lot of fun to watch the kids get out there and get engaged. But know that they're born to take risks. So when you provide an environment, when you provide equipment, they're going to try things with it that may or may not be effective for what that equipment or material is meant to do. So be prepared for that. Think about how would a child see this, what might a child do with this equipment, and be prepared for that potential risk-taking. Sometimes it's a good risk that they're taking, in the sense it's going to challenge their bodies. Sometimes it's an unsafe risk that could hurt their bodies. So you have to be careful and be mindful of that. Having a right space to move, really thinking about what it's going to take. If you've ever been around 3 to 5-year-olds, they have energy, and energy for days. And so you want to make sure they have space to use up as much of that energy as they can, and the kind of equipment that's going to help them kind of challenge their muscles in their body effectively. And then they also need support, though, to build courage and stamina, because they're going to do these short bursts, like energy movements, and then they're going to kind of peter out, and you're going to have to figure out how to keep them motivated, how to keep them moving, right? So you got to be able to build that support, and whether that comes in the form of encouragement or, you know, setting up a little bit of challenge or competition around it, being able to protect them when they take a risk and it doesn't pay off, and kind of saying, wow, you tried really hard at that, but you kind of fell down, didn't you? You know, and really noticing when they need that help and support to kind of keep going and keep moving forward in their skill development. So what are some of the types of play that kids go through as they develop? And so this is a continuum, and sometimes children will move backwards and forwards, but let's talk a little bit about kind of how play develops in general for children. So you start out when you're probably in that young, kind of late infancy, early toddlerhood, where oftentimes you're doing what they call unoccupied play. So you're usually pretty stationary, and some of that comes about because you're not able to move your body as well. Your control of your limbs and your legs is limited, and even your trunk for that matter. So oftentimes you'll see children kind of just sitting and playing, or maybe reaching up to a baby gym and, you know, moving an arm or something just to make things move. And so they don't always have a lot of purpose other than curiosity. They're just looking around, trying to kind of take in their environment. And so that play does not have a whole lot of rhyme or reason to it. And then they move into a solitary play, where they can get active with equipment and materials, but usually it's very much focused on how they are engaged with that. It doesn't really encompass the idea that other people, children, or anyone else who's around them engaged in anything else. They're not tuning into that. They're focused on their ability to master what it is that they're doing in that moment. So a lot of times you'll see them very focused, very determined, going after something. I always think about older toddlers who have gotten good control of their body movements, and they get ready to climb something. They're very focused on how they're going to get somewhere. And if they're struggling to get up, they're spending all their energy moving to try to get that to happen, right? And then you have your onlooker play, where now they're starting to notice that, hey, there's other people around me, and they're doing things that seem kind of interesting and exciting. I'm going to kind of pay attention to that. You know, I might mimic it sometimes, but I'm not sure. I might just kind of just pay attention and see what they're doing. And so they'll still be kind of doing their thing, but they're going to be tuning into what's happening around them. And then the next one is parallel play, where you see them, and you probably have seen kids, if you've ever been around young children for any period of time, you'll see them, one will do one thing, and then someone will come right up behind them. Or they'll go into competition over being able to have access to the same, materials or equipment around that. If someone goes down the slide, you'll see, oh, well, I can get up there and I can go down the slide too. And so they kind of mimic and want to make what they see happen around them happen for themselves. And so they're learning to develop that skill, that sense of risk, by trying out what other people do. And sometimes that mimic works for them in the sense that they're getting new opportunities and new motor skills development, and sometimes it puts them at risk. Maybe they're not quite at the same developmental level as another child is, and so you might have to be aware that they might try to mimic a behavior that they don't have the capacity quite yet to meet, right? So the last two are associative and cooperative. Associative is more interested in each other, so that's where you see that pretend play developing, where kids start to imagine themselves as superheroes or princesses or, as race car drivers or firefighters. And so you see them doing a lot of big movements around this idea of developing play with that imagination and that collaboration. And so sometimes the equipment and materials are just props in that kind of developmental stage. But the social interaction, that you come with me, you're going to do this, I'm going to do that kind of play, becomes a really powerful tool. And that's where they start to really develop that competence socially with each other. And it also creates some fights and challenges as well, too. And then the last one is that cooperative play, where they learn that sometimes certain types of play have rules, have boundaries, have limits, or have an intent that they're supposed to meet. So how do you get there? How do you meet that expectation? And that's usually where we see most of our kids that kind of start to enter more organized sports, understand the rules of the game, understand, that, in soccer, my ball is supposed to go in the goal, or I'm supposed to prevent the ball from getting into the goal. And so those are the different ways that we see that happening. So, 3 to 5-year-olds are also learning to develop their body coordination and strength. So if you think about how motor skills develop, when you are learning how to make a muscle do the things that you want it to do, you are figuring out first and foremost, how does it move? How does the combination of muscle movements lead to that mastery? And so sometimes having your brain be able to tell you what to move and when to move it to meet that expectation of mastery is going to be a piece of that development that children are still working on. Their brains are still developing. There's neural networks that fire off and say, okay, time to move the foot this way. The eyes have to watch where the foot's going so I can make sure I kick that soccer ball in the right direction, or I've got to be able to hold the bat level and be strong enough and work those muscles enough to turn around and then hit the tee off, or hit the ball off the tee. How are they starting to think about all the facets that it takes to actually move your muscles in a coordinated, specific action? And then also developing strength. As you probably can imagine, they've just barely started to use those muscles actively and regularly. And if they don't get enough opportunity to get out there and try it and practice it and develop it, they're going to still be struggling with how strong they can be. And so while their minds might want to make them think that they're braver and stronger than they are, sometimes their muscles aren't quite where they need to be at that time. And then learning to develop their balance and their awareness of their body in space. Unfortunately, in human development, our heads always grow a lot faster than our bodies initially, and so we are kind of stuck for a period of time there with this huge, almost bobblehead of a head on our bodies that our trunk has to learn to hold and control, right? And so that ability to understand our bodies in space and recognize when we are out of whack or in whack is something that they really have to develop. And they have to also learn how to communicate the information that they're seeing in their world, what's coming in through their eyes, to their brain, that has to make calculations about how then am I going to move in response to that. And then they have to be able to learn to listen with understanding to directions or to safety expectations. And so oftentimes young children struggle to be able to hear or listen or focus on some of that information. So as adults, we have to think about, okay, let's give it to them in short bursts. Let's be very clear and explicit. Maybe we need to have some props or modeling of what is going to be safe versus unsafe. And so we have to kind of figure out ways to understand that they're going to be struggling with that ability to listen for a period of time. And then the last one is to make choices to express their likes and dislikes. Oftentimes, 3 to 5 year olds just kind of do or don't do, and they don't always tell you what that means for them. And so they have to learn how to think about what it is that they enjoy doing and what they don't enjoy doing. And you have to learn how to balance their desires and your need to have them develop those skill sets as well too. Oftentimes they are so egotistical in the sense that the world is all about them right now, that they forget that sometimes that there are others out there, that they have to tune in and pay attention to the things that are happening around them in a way that they can understand. And they have to learn to communicate what works and what doesn't work for them as well. All right, other things that they're learning to adapt their behavior to fit different situations. How am I going to do, something that I love to do in my backyard and a playground at school? Is it going to be okay? Is it not going to be okay? Do I have the equipment I need? What if I don't have the equipment I need? How am I going to make a choice around that? Play and interact with other children. Again, I told you they were very egotistical in that way because their brains are really focused on them right now. So when they want to play with others, they are immature in their ability to navigate those relationships effectively to play, to even hear the instructions, to understand how to move their bodies in collaboration with somebody else. So they have to learn how to adapt to that. They have to accept things like negotiation and compromise and also conflict, because 9 times out of 10, most areas that children are playing at in a structured sense, there's usually not enough equipment for everybody, and they're going to have to learn to develop the capacity to either wait or ask for a turn or figure out a way to share the equipment in a safe way. So what are the ways that you kind of negotiate that? And then learning to respect the rights of others. I don't know if you've ever watched young children, but they usually like to take things away from each other without saying a word. They like to pull things out from under kids, not necessarily in a malicious way, but just because they want it at that moment, and so it's going to be theirs regardless. So they have to learn to respect the rights of others, and even to respect the rights of the adults around them, knowing that the adults have a responsibility to help them stay safe, and understanding that, when adults ask you to do something or need you to, behave in a certain way, that it's for your benefit and for your safety and well-being. So there's a lot to manage. All right, so there's lots of resources out there on play and learning. I'm going to open it up. If anyone has any questions about play and development of children in their play that I can answer, I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Go for it, guys.
Anyone have any good stories about kids' play that they've observed?
So I actually have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So when you are planning their playtime outside and you are going to the park and there are like children around and you do want to teach your kid to still stand on his opinions, or okay, in a sense, don't give up so fast, but yet respect others, where is the line? Like, where is the limit?
So it can really depend on the age of the child. If you're talking about a younger 3 to 4 year old, they're going to struggle with that regardless of how much you kind of give them some support along the way. An older preschooler for like late 4s, 5s, and 6s, what you're going to find is with them, a lot of what I do is a lot of coaching. So we talk about, what happens when another kid comes up to you and wants to be in your space and you don't want them there. You give them scripts, you give them words, you give them opportunity to practice. I even with my kids would go out and I would pretend that I was the kid that was kind of, being a little bit pushy or difficult. And I would say, so what are you going to do now? And I would kind of coach them through that. A lot of times for them, they're very creatures of kind of example and habit. And so when you give them practice to kind of negotiate those relationships effectively, that's probably an easiest way. With our younger ones, really it's about being close and paying attention to when you see those signs that they might be struggling with an interaction or struggling with an action that they want to take and maybe being frustrated. What I always do is kind of pay attention and tune into what are some of those signals that they may be giving off that kind of let you know that they're hitting that threshold where they either don't have the skill or they don't have the capacity to hold on to the energy that's coming from that experience. Does that help you out?
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Comments? Anybody remember a particularly fun time when they were younger that they played well and learned some of these same skill sets?
Brent, do you recognize any of what Mrs. Gardner said with the children at your mum's childcare centre?
Well, I started playing basketball when I was really young.
Yeah. So did you find yourself able to go out and just play independent play as easily, or were you kind of focused on basketball play a lot when you were a kid, having started early?
So, honestly, it was kind of a little bit of everything. I was very active as a child, and I kind of learned quickly as well.
Okay.
So, if there was like rules to the game, or whether I was just climbing a tree by myself, or shooting by myself, or taught myself how to ride a bike. So it's just a lot of everything, I think, actually.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of trial and error with different skills, different, equipment that you used as a part of those skill developments.
Can you say that one more time?
So that you engage in a lot of different skill developments using different equipment, challenging yourself. Because riding a bike, the type of movement that you need for riding a bike is totally different from the type of movement you might need for shooting a basketball. So you were having to kind of, adapt yourself to those different skill sets.
Oh yeah, 100%. It was just, we made up games all the time, and it was just, I think because of that, because of the imagination, it kind of built so many things that I didn't even notice at the time.
Absolutely. If you really see kids who have had a reasonable amount of time to play, who have had, a good environment to even just get their bodies moving, maybe even a couple of peers to collaborate, it's amazing the type of in-depth games and activities that they play that really challenge their muscles. On the CBC playground, there were a number of children for a long time that were, of course they watched superhero cartoons and different things, but they would get out and on our equipment, and we had these slide, like a large slide climber kind of thing. So there were ladders and steps up and slides to go down. And so they would engage in these elaborate games of, okay, you run around here, I'm going to be the bad guys, you're going to be the good guys, and before you know it, they're just racing and jumping and climbing and sliding and really trying hard to get their bodies moving and faster and quicker and more daring if they felt like it. And so it was that kind of taking something that was comfortable and familiar for them into a collaborative experience that then they were moving their bodies and doing some pretty dynamic stuff with that. Some of the times we pulled out climbing ladders when they were doing the lab experience, and so kids had never been able to climb something that moved and shifted on them and to go higher than most of the equipment that kids typically get in most safe playgrounds, so to speak. And so they were able to take risks, and that was a powerful thing to watch kids who initially were very scared of that to really jump into it. And once they, got a couple rungs up, they were like, woohoo, here I go, And so it's kind of neat to watch that. And then other kids would just stare and watch them like, okay, can I be brave enough or can I be strong enough to do that same thing as well? And so that's where as adults we get to step in and say, okay, let's give it a try. I don't know how many students tried to do a couple steps up the rungs just to encourage a child to get up and move, Other questions, other comments about play and observations? I challenge you all to get out there and to pay attention to kids playing. I know with the pandemic it has definitely changed the dynamic of what we see in terms of play. Like even if you went to the fast food joint, they had a play space, you could at least watch the kids during that. Unfortunately, we don't see some of that happening right now. And I definitely don't see as many kids out and about, even in our neighborhoods and our parks. So I'm really hoping that as things start to get to a different level, we'll start to be able to allow you to get out there and see kids playing. If you have nieces or nephews or family members that you have a connection to, or friends even that have kids, definitely find ways to get a sense of what some of the things you observe and notice about how they play. You'll learn a lot just by paying attention to how they move, what they're thinking. I even sometimes ask kids, so what's going on in your mind right now? And get a feel for where they're at and what they want to do. And and then you as an adult can then think about what you know about how they can learn to move their body and facilitate or support them going forward from that. So, all right, well, I wish you all well and continuing to encourage and develop motor skills in anyone you come across, and hopefully sometime you'll have an opportunity to work with some children and really get a feel for what this feels like and looks like. Thank you all so much for your time today.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that was a lot of information, but hopefully you can take some of that away and really think about it over the next few days. Maybe if you're anywhere near a park, go see what the children are doing and think about what Mrs. Gard has given you today. It's a wealth of information, and just remember that all these domains interact, so they can't play if they can't move, and moving without playing is meaningless for them, right? So, and for us, to be honest, right? I'm not entirely convinced that that ever changes in someone's life, right? I move because I enjoy it and it's play, not because I have to. So that's the goal, I think. All right, so good, well done. I will, what day is it today? Monday, right. Oh, on Wednesday we are going to do the importance of modeling lecture. Okay, so that's the information that you will need to hand for Wednesday. Right, the modeling PowerPoint and modeling notes. Okay. All right, I will see you all tomorrow morning, and we will finish chapter 8, I think. I've completely lost track. Okay, I think we're finishing chapter 8 and starting chapter 9. Check the syllabus, guys. Okay, have a good afternoon. Bye for now.
Have a good day.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Dr. Wall,
Yes.
I have a question. Okay, so the stage of development are due today at 11 p.m.,
Yes.
correct?
Yes, I believe
Oh,
so.
I was not sure because I was looking at the rubric for it, and I wasn't sure like of the kind of stages of development you're talking about, because if you look at the chart that you were showing us, you gave the chart also, and then you gave the stages of development. Do you think like the stages of development as in like the growth from like the fetus, stuff like that, until then, like write our own?
No, you're just doing that one skill, so the pole vault,
Okay, like that stages.
Yeah, stages of development for the pole vault is
Okay,
the assignment. And I went over it, I can't remember what day last week, but I went over it quite a lot last week. So if you run back and have a quick look at those videos, you might find the explanation again.
okay, thank you.
Okay? Yeah, use the pole vault video, but use the idea of the MSU chart, right? That's what you're trying to show, that your understanding of the MSU chart, that you understand that skills don't go from step one, what I look like as a beginner, and then I can teach that person to look like someone who's experienced and competent at that skill. That does not happen,
Right.
right? So
Mhm.
you're trying to create hypothetical stages of development for pole vault.
Okay.
Does that explain it?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
Okay.
Okay, that's all. Thank you so much for answering
No problem. And I've got office hours this afternoon, Alexis, at
that. Okay,
3:15 to 5:15. So if you have more questions, jump into the office hours link in the Blackboard column there
okay,
and come and have a chat with me.
thank you.
Okay?
All right, bye.
All right. Bye.
Glad I stayed in here because I had a question about that too.
Eben.
Okay, Dr. Well,
You got any other questions? You okay?
only other question was about the other lab. But basically, I think we might have talked about it before, is that we do the lab in class for physiology.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
All right.
yeah. So if you were here, we would be collecting that data while you were here, and I would be helping you. And so
Yeah.
on the ones where you have to do something, like last week, we just went over the intensity stuff. So there was no lab per se for you last week.
Mhm.
Right? But yeah, so then my plan is to spend some time at the beginning of the lab session explaining the labs and giving you some information about them. And then you take the rest of that time to actually collect the data and fill in your worksheets.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's it. That's
Okay.
all. I guess I'll see you too.
All right. Take care.
You too.
Adriana, did you have a question? Not my problem. Yeah, that's the problem, you know, and you've just got no, without the camera.
But it would be the same if they were in class. If they don't tune in and they don't learn, then they're not getting it, you know? So,
Yeah.
It's kind of like you can take the horse to the water trough, but you can't make them drink it.
Sitting at the back of the classroom texting. It's not
Yep.
really.
I know, I just had something where I told them at the beginning, look, you have a responsibility, this is what you know, this is why you are here, then do what you're responsible to, and if it's not, then, you know, you're gonna choose something and you're gonna accept the consequences of that choice.
I've got 3 students in this lab who have not come to lab yet. Not once.
Yikes.
It would help if I turn the camera on.